What is going on, my fellow geeks?
3 movies with elves and a guy with a white beard.
Not a lot of people accept it as canon.
2022 will be the year of Star Wars.
Well, I have more than just one piece of geek news.
I have been Isaac Hunter.
Which is like high culture, but better.
Hello, fellow geeks, and welcome back to Raving Geeks, the weekly pop culture podcast where we talk about all things geeky and geek culture, which is like high culture, but better. My name is Hope Goodearl, host of Raving Geeks podcast, along with my co-host Carter, who will introduce himself in a minute with our question of the week. If you're just joining us for the first time and you like this episode, you could find our other episodes at cm-life.com and any other place that you listen to podcasts like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And with Spotify Wrapped just coming out, maybe next year we'll be on your Spotify Wrapped. But yeah, just search up Central Michigan Life Podcasts Raving Geeks. So I am in front of Giselle's house, and her husband Patrick Dempsey / McDreamy, who actually had to sing after getting out of Grey's Anatomy, not having to be in any of the singing episodes. But so Carter, I want to know, what is your favorite fairy tale or favorite version of a fairy tale?
My favorite fairy tale is The Little Mermaid, but I also really like everything they did in the TV show Once Upon a Time, if that kind of counts as its own separate fairy tale, because it's an overarching story, but just with little fairy tales in between. But I really like how that show did the fairy tale mythos. But Little Mermaid's always been one of my favorites, and Cinderella too. I always like those two stories the best.
I will say that my favorite, I can't choose an actual favorite fairy tale because they're all so gruesome, but also in their own different ways. But I will say that my favorite version of a fairy tale has to be the Jeremy Renner version of Hansel and Gretel. That came out in the early 2010s.
I think it's 2008, pretty sure.
In what?
I think it was 2008.
Was it? I think it was later than that, because
20...
I know my sister and I went to go see it together because it was rated R. 2013.
2013. Got it.
Yep. Hansel and Gretel, Gemma Arterton, Famke Janssen, so you might know her if you know the original X-Men movies as Phoenix / Jean Grey. I almost forgot her name for a minute. But yeah, I really liked that one. It gave like a twist on like what happens after the story ends, because fairy tales, they're short, they end at a certain time, but there's still stuff that happens. But yeah, so that is our question of the week. If you guys have a favorite fairy tale or favorite version of a fairy tale, we would love to hear what your response is. But yeah, so next on our to-do is to give you guys some geek news for the last, we'll say 2 weeks roughly, because we were on a little break for the holiday / Black Friday. If you don't celebrate Thanksgiving and you'd like to go shopping instead, or just like the time off. So Carter, what geek news do you have for us this week?
Releasing just today actually were 3 new trailers from Disney. One for Indiana Jones 5, which has been given the title Dial of Destiny. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and Ant-Man also got like a sizzle reel trailer from CCXP, which is a Comic-Con in Brazil that's going on right now. And the newest Transformers movie, Rise of the Beast, also got a trailer today. Looks really good. And a couple of casting news came out. Jenna Ortega, mostly known for the new Scream movie and Wednesday, is supposedly going to play White Tiger in the Daredevil Born Again TV series, which is really cool to know. And that Marvel is looking for a conflicted and powerful villain for Thunderbolts, and they're thinking about casting Ryan Gosling or Alexander Skarsgård in that role. I hope Alexander Skarsgård get it, because after The Northman, he really does deserve new roles. And then Bob Chapek got fired from Disney recently, and Bob Iger is back, which I thought was a crazy power move by Disney after Bob Chapek's controversial comments about animation not being for adults and only being for kids. I personally am glad that he has been fired, because I didn't think he was doing a good job in the first place, and I'm happy to see that Bob Iger came back. And a little bit of disappointing / sad news is that Chris Hemsworth's taking a break from acting after learning he could be diagnosed with Alzheimer's in the next coming of years, which I think is really sad. I hope he wraps up his Thor character here pretty soon, if that disease ever decides to take place. But I'm glad he's taking time off to go spend some time with his family. That's all I have.
Okay, I'm gonna add on to that and just talk a little bit more, because that is one that has hit my family, unfortunately. It's not so much that it could hit him in the next couple of years, Chris Hemsworth, but he is 8 to 10 more times likely to get Alzheimer's as he ages than the general population, because of the gene that scientists have been able to figure out. A common link between people with Alzheimer's have this specific gene, and unfortunately both of his parents passed it on to him.
Wow.
Which of course leads to him being 8 to 10 times more likely of getting Alzheimer's. And Chris Hemsworth, being the lovable giant teddy bear that we all know and love on screen as Thor. Some of us, back when he was Chris Pine's dad in Star Trek, you can tell very in the documentary series that he did with Disney Plus, you could tell how much it hit him, just realizing that Alzheimer's is the disease that takes everything. It takes who you are, who your loved ones are, and all the memories that you made with them. And so I totally get his need and want to go spend more time with his kids and to make the memories with them over making movies. I doubt that he will be gone for long from making movies, but I do hope that he takes a well-deserved break and is not forced back before he's ready. Because I do think that he loves filming and being around other people to make the incredible memories that come with filmmaking and making art, essentially.
Right.
But so in slightly happier news, also in the casting aspect, we got 2 new gods for the Percy Jackson series. We have Jay Duplass as Hades, and then Timothy Amundsen as Hephaestus. And for those of you who know Carlton Lassiter as Hephaestus, I'm super excited for that, and also that he was in Gallivant. So yeah, I'm really excited for that. I've never seen Jay Duplass and everything, or if I have, I don't remember. But just the picture that they posted of him, I'm like, this is gonna be a really interesting Hades. So yeah, I'm more excited that we keep getting more god casting updates. Really want to know who's gonna be playing Zeus and Poseidon, but it's okay, we can wait. It's not coming out until next year, sometime soon. Rick Riordan, we need that information. In other news, there is a big rumor going around that Ryan Reynolds has talked Channing Tatum into appearing in Deadpool 3. Whether or not it's going to be Gambit is still out in the we don't know, but the fact that Channing Tatum is very likely possibly going to be in Deadpool 3 means that Ryan Reynolds is out there going, hey buddy, I'm gonna be annoying until you say yes. And of course, continuing on the Marvel theme, I wanted to read out the message from Ryan Coogler that was posted on Marvel's Instagram about Black Panther Wakanda Forever. He says, "Gratitude. That is my only word that comes to mind for your support of our work on the film. I am filled with it. Thank you. Thank you to the people who bought their tickets early and camped out opening weekend." So Carter, he's thanking you. Um, Thank you to those of you who took their families out, young ones and elders in tow. To those who organized youth screenings and after parties, who bought out theaters for communities and friends. To all of you who watched multiple times and encouraged other folks to check it out. Our film is over 2.5 hours long, so thank you for holding those bathroom breaks. Our film has 6 languages spoken in it. Thank you for bearing with the subtitles. And our film deals with the inescapable human emotion of grief. Thank you for opening yourself up to the emotional journey of this film. We made something to honor our friend, who was a giant in our industry, and we also made something to be enjoyed in a theatrical setting with friends, family, and strangers. Something to be quoted and discussed, to be debated, something to make people both physically and emotionally feel seen. This medium wouldn't exist without an audience, and I thank you for giving me professional purpose and an emotional outlet. I look forward to bringing you more stories in the future. Sincerely, Ryan Coogler. I'm not going to try and pronounce the Wakandan that he signed off with because I will mess it up and I'll be very upset about it. But he goes on to say, "Wakanda forever, Chadwick forever, long live T'Challa." And I thought that was very important because they have discussed recasting Black Panther, and to know that this film has impacted so many people without the recasting and taking the story in a slightly different way is super awesome to hear. And so 2 more bits of news. One, because I'm a huge book nerd, but the Brooklyn Public Library, which is one of the nation's largest libraries, reveals the most borrowed books in its 125-year history. So what's been borrowed the most times since the library has been opened in 1896 goes to Where the Wild Things Are, which did get turned into a film. I've never seen the film. I saw the play because it was a play as well. And then The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats, and The Cat in the Hat by Dr. Seuss are the second and third most borrowed books, followed by A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens and Are You My Mother by P.D. Eastman. So I thought that was very interesting that the most checked out books are picture books.
Yeah.
Everybody likes picture books, even adults. And my final bit of geek news, which some of you will go, "Ew, it's sports, that's not a geeky thing." Listen, you can geek out on sports because I do it a lot. Okay? Being in a fandom is not specifically like movies and books. It can be sports as well. Miguel Cabrera, who I remember in elementary school when he first went to the World Series with the Tigers and Justin Verlander, has announced that he plans to retire at the end of next season, the 2023 season. So this has been coming for a while. The dude's getting old for baseball standards.
I'm honestly surprised he didn't do it sooner, but it's great that he stuck it out for that amount of years.
Yeah, I think mostly is because, especially in recent years, he's kind of gotten injured a bit more. And so he wanted to be able to continue to play, but he also had like certain goals that he wanted to hit. So like the 300 home runs hit, and something else that happened.
Isn't it like 2,000 hits or something like that, or 1,000?
Yeah. So I think being so close to those things, he was like, we just gotta stick it out until we're there. So yeah, that is our geek news for the week. So our geek topic for this week. If you were curious about why I asked Carter about fairy tales,
Mhm.
it's because we wanted to talk about fairy tales. Specifically, how recently fairy tales have been twisted, not necessarily to make them darker, but to just put like new spins on them, make them to stay relevant. Because if you think of a story like Red Riding Hood, who's a little girl skipping through the woods off on her way to bring a basket of bread and um, cookies to her grandmother's house, um, that's not necessarily how it happens nowadays. You driving cars, or you just FaceTime grandmother and say, "I hope you got the basket we sent you." Um, but so Carter, um, specifically what brought this around was the fact of Disenchanted being released. Did you get a chance to watch it?
Yeah, I did.
What was your initial reaction to it?
I didn't like it very much, actually.
What? Why
Yeah,
not?
I didn't love it, honestly. I think it had a clever plot. I think, I don't know. I just didn't like some of the story plot details that were used. I didn't like how Morgan became like the cynical teenager, even though she's been surrounded with um, music and magic, and that her mom is a literal Disney princess for all her life, and she just kind of became this boring, typical teenager. And I kind of wish this whole film was not about Giselle realizing that she needed a fairy tale life, but Morgan realizing that she needed a fairy tale life. And I wish that she made that wish instead of Giselle. I wish that I had a fairy tale life, because for Morgan, not everything was going her way, and she knows that her mom kind of had like the perfect life in that fairy tale world. And I wish that she made that wish and she knew the consequences of that wish coming to fruition, like the evil queen and Giselle turning into the evil stepmother, which I thought was so clever. I just didn't like how the movie proceeded with those ideas. I did think that the scroll ended up being my favorite character, though. He was just this goofy looking CGI character, but not in like the bad CGI, but like he moved like the way paper would move if it was a living creature, and he had a very funny voice. And I don't know, I just kind of wish we saw more of that character. And if, like, you know how Giselle had the little chipmunk as the little buddy, if Morgan made that wish, the scroll was the little buddy teaching her all these rules of fairy tales and what being in a fairy tale life is actually like.
See, I completely understood Morgan, and I don't think she was the uh cynical teenager. But if you've grown up in the city, and this gets talked about in a lot of different genres across books, movies, TV shows, but also like myself included, is you go from living this essentially fast-paced life, where you have all this freedom. So, Morgan saying, well, I've taken the train before by myself, like it's not that big of a deal. Um, to all of a sudden her parents are more involved in her life and are like, no, you need to be safe and you need to be it made sense that she couldn't fully slow down, because also as a teenager, you're not going to be able to like transition that quickly, especially leaving all your friends behind, going to this place, if you're watching online or if you've seen the movie, um, to a pink house. And Morgan is very definitely not the pink and always flowers. Like, she's got a little edge to her, not in like the full emo, goth heavy metal type of way, but like the typical like teenager of, oh yeah, I like these older bands. I like wearing things that are exactly like Giselle. And I think Morgan more wanted the family aspect of them realizing who she was and who she was becoming, more than a fairy tale life.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were a few times in the movie that I noticed, like when her dad calls the baby My Little Princess. And you can see Morrigan's face just fall, because here she is, she's been the baby for 16 years, and all of a sudden her dad's focus is on this new kid who's teeny, and she's not being called the princess anymore. And so there's like that, not necessarily power struggle, but power dynamic between, like, Morgan loves her little sister, but also is like, hey, I'm here too. Like, this isn't all about you and the baby. Like, I'm here. And so I don't think that it would have worked the same if Morgan had made the wish for a fairy tale life. I think her wish would have been more of like, I wish they paid attention to me more, or like noticed who I really was, which would have led into, oh crap. Oh, there's a movie about it. Oh wait, like Wizards of Waverly Place, kind of. Where like all of a sudden, they forget who the different characters are. So like Max, they forget that Max is there. Or Narnia, the third movie, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, so the fifth book, where Lucy wishes to be like Susan and essentially wishes herself away. I think if Morgan had made a wish using the wish wand, whatever it was called, then she would have ended up wishing her little sister away. And it would have been a lot more dramatic than kind of like that lighthearted, let's make fun of fairy tales that it was, because I'll agree with you too. I absolutely loved Giselle becoming the wicked stepmother, because I liked how like there were different stages that she had to go through before becoming the full stepmother. So it's like, okay, so we've now established that there are some stepmothers that are okay, they're not necessarily evil, but they're not good. But then you've got the evil stepmothers that, these things happen, and that's what makes them evil. And I did like that part. I also liked the Wicked Queen with Maya Rudolph. That was fantastic. Absolutely loved it.
I thought it was funny when what's the little chipmunk's name? But when he turned into a fat evil cat, I thought that was clever. Yeah, that was cute.
I liked his line of, I now have to lick this, and I don't know why. And I'm like, that is my cat. That's the cat. Yes, I'm talking about you.
Yeah, that was really clever. I really like that. I wish James Marsden was in the movie a little bit more as the prince. I think it kind of sucks that they left him back in fairy tale world, and he didn't really get his moment to shine.
For me, that one was showing how much Prince Charming, excuse you, do not step on the computer, thank you. How much Prince Charming has actually accepted his role of king of Astoria? Yeah, that's the name of the town. And like how much he cares for all the creatures and people in it now. Whereas like when he was with Giselle in the first one, it was more about just winning the princess.
Yeah.
So I liked the character development of James Marsden. I do think I would have liked more interaction between him and Patrick Dempsey, especially with the sword, of like Patrick Dempsey being like, okay, now what do I do with this thing? And James Marsden coming in and be like, no, don't hold him like that. What are you doing? That's not how you. And then like showing him a few things and then having to part with the sword again. I think that would have been more interesting, especially when they changed it to Patrick Dempsey's character being that person that's trying to figure out, who do I save now? I'm supposed to go save people, so what do I do?
I totally agree.
I just want to know what exactly, okay, I understand the giant coming through and destroying everything, but I was like, how does a dragon fit in New York? Like, I was like, what? I really wanted to dive a little bit deeper into that, like have the dragon come out and be like, I just want to be left alone or something. Like, stop bothering me.
Yeah.
Instead of just, let's push a rock and close him in this cave. What?
I think that's just saying that in fairy tales, a more complicated way of solving things is done when there are obviously more simpler ways of doing things.
That is completely fair.
But that was also done in the first movie too, so
yeah.
kind of redid that. They redo a lot of things in the second movie that they did in the first movie, like Giselle going and making another world and her exploring that world, trying to be somebody different. They did that in the first movie. That, like, I just don't think Giselle should have been the main character. I really think it should have been Morgan. I think that's where the movie really faltered for me, because I'm like, I already know Giselle's story from the first one. I didn't think she needed that much character development, and I really think Morgan was in desperate need of like having her own story. But
I think for me, with it being Giselle's story, it was more about, okay, yes, she's adapted to living in our world versus the fairy tale world. But it's more like what the big theme of the movie was, you know, in a fairy tale world, once you find your happily ever after, that's it. There's nothing more. It's just happily ever after. But in our world, and I think this is a commentary on our world too, but I don't know how deep we want to get into this. You know, our world, we're constantly going, I'm looking for my happily ever after. I'm looking for my knight in shining armor, my damsel in distress, whatever, you know, that thing that's going to make me happy for the rest of my life. But in our world, that's not how it ends. You know, you still have to fight to find the rest of the happily ever after. And Morgan already knows that because she's lived in the real world her whole life. And so it's, you know, it's Giselle coming to terms with, this world is not like mine. I have these expectations, but oh, look. Because honestly, to me, Giselle never felt grown up. And that was partially how she was portrayed as animated. And then when it was Amy Adams on the screen, like when she was animated, I felt like she was like, you know, 16 to 18, late teens. And then suddenly she's Amy Adams and she's 30 years old. And it's like, wait, the whole 30 going out 13, you know.
Yeah. I also felt like the passage of time in this movie was weird. I think it would have made more sense for the story to take place if it was 2 years later, not 17 plus years later, where she actually had time to adapt and have another kid.
Think so, because I think, like, part of it is also like, you think your life is going to turn out a certain way. And we were discussing this in one of my classes too, not specifically for this movie, but like with relationships and stuff too. Like sometimes it takes you a while because you're still in that happy phase, that honeymoon phase, that whatever. And we also don't know truly how long it took them to get married.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure part of it was also, hey, Giselle's an actual person. She needs a social security number. How do we do that without identity theft?
Yeah, and would she have to go through like the whole like illegal alien stuff, like taking a test and everything and like getting a driver's license? And
yeah,
honestly, that would have been more of a better movie. Or I would have kind of appreciated it if, like, you know, this movie started out in live action and the rest of the movie was animated, just like how the first movie started out being animated and went into live action. I think that would have also been clever. I don't know. I just see a lot of different ways that this movie could have gone. I would have liked to have seen Morgan explore the fairy tale world instead of Giselle being the fish out of water. It'd be funny if Morgan was the fish out of water in the animated world, and they just kind of flip-flop the stories with different characters. I think that would have been fun.
I think what they
Like,
need
let's
to
say
do.
like Morgan ran away because she doesn't love her, like she doesn't love the life that she's given with Giselle and her dad, and like she wants to go explore something new.
I think what they need to do is make some shorts, and it can be Olaf talking. We can have a live action Olaf. I'm totally okay with that. Olaf narrator of, Giselle becoming a legal resident of the United States. Morgan trying to figure out how to get back to Astoria when she's younger and not being able to do it and just falling into different wells at different times. And
Yeah, like an Alice, what is it? Not Alice in Wonderland, but it's Alice Through the Looking Glass, right?
yeah.
Alice is going through. Yeah, that would have been fun. I actually would have liked that.
But I also think that they could do like a short for like a epilogue of like Morgan going back to the well behind their house, being able to go to Astoria,
Mhm.
and like helping to fix things up, but also, all of a sudden she's got to deal with ogres and giants and dragons um and like Prince Charming coming and being like, "No, this is how you do it." And she's like, "That makes no sense whatsoever. Like what are you doing?"
Mhm.
Um because I think it would also be interesting to see the interaction between Morgan and the character that becomes her Prince Charming, that's the evil queen's son,
Mhm.
um and like the interaction between them, and then having Giselle and Maya Rudolph as like the overbearing mothers
Yeah.
who both want the best for their kids but are, going about it two different ways, and which they could honestly make that into a movie all on its own. But to address your like the time gap too, part of that was also because Amy Adams, at least I'm assuming Amy Adams, because she was one of the like executive producers of the
Mhm.
movie, she really had to fight just to even get a second movie.
Right.
And with Disney, it's like they were like, "Oh, well, I mean, I don't even know what they were thinking for why they didn't give it a sequel." Um, but I also kind of like that it's farther away because it's like Monsters Inc., how we got Monsters University a few years ago, that
Mhm.
like the kids who had it when we were little, and then all of a sudden, we're adults and we can pick up on the Easter eggs and all the different references to all the other um fairy tales. And honestly, you could probably play a drinking game if you're over 21. Um to, oh, found a reference, take a drink,
Yeah,
but
definitely.
so moving away from Disenchanted a little bit, but still staying on the topic of fairy tales. Um you and I both said a favorite version of fairy tales. And I had mentioned earlier that fairy tales get adapted to keep them relevant.
Mhm.
Um, but so what specifically about, you said Once Upon a Time
Mhm.
was your favorite adaptation. So what specifically about Once Upon a Time?
It's been a while since I've watched the show, so bear with me. I kind of liked how all the fairy tales were connected into one overarching story, that the evil queen cursed Snow White's wedding, that they'll never ever be happy, and she creates this whole world where she separates all the different characters, and one by one in each episode, they all have to come together and like realize who they are. And I think it was really clever how they used Henry as Prince Charming and Snow White's kid as like the chosen one who would bring them all together. Grandkid, right, grandkid. But also technically their kid who was it Ella? I don't remember the name of their actual kid. Emma, yeah. But like those two would be the ones to bring them all back together.
That was one of my problems with the show. I'm like, all right, so you have Charming and you have Snow, and you come up with Emma.
Yeah.
Like that is the most like Americanized. What?
Yeah, it's Emma. Hey, but at least they got the grandchild Henry, who's like, you know, who was the one to like bring them all together with the storybook, and he's like the one with all the magic and youth. But I haven't watched that show in a while, so it may have worn off some of its magic. I stopped around the Neverland season when they made Peter Pan the bad guy, which that was a really good season, actually. I like that one. And Emma falls in love with Hook. I thought it was cute.
Yes.
But yeah, it's been a while. But my favorite adaptation of any fairy tale is definitely the Grimm Fairy Tales version of Cinderella. I don't know. I love that the whole entire point.
Because there are actually two versions. And the only reason I know this is because for pre-student teaching, my host teacher was like, hey, I don't know exactly what I want to do for our next unit. I'm thinking fairy tales. And you're going to do your lesson to start off the unit. And it was like, thanks, Andy. But so there are actually two versions, both Grimm, but the severity of what happens to the stepsisters is different.
Well, I'm talking about the one where the stepsisters, I think one of them cuts off their own big toe to try and fit their foot in the shoe.
That happens both times.
Oh, that does happen both times. Well, what about the end where the both sisters get their eyes pecked out by the ravens?
That's the version. That's the second version.
Yeah, I love the second version just because of that, because they get their comeuppance at the end because of how terrible they are.
Yeah. I think, that was actually interesting to me because I found one version and I was like, oh, this is great. And then I got to the end and I was like, wait, where are they pecking out the eyes? Like, they're supposed to peck out the eyes. Oh, that's the version that they printed like 2 years later. What?
I mean, it's okay. I think it works, Sometimes later printing, they change the ending. I think that's pretty good. That's my favorite interpretation of the story, at least.
I will be honest and say that, like, it is so bad, but I kind of like the version of Red Riding Hood where she actually falls in love with the wolf.
Yeah, there's also a couple stories like, and Once Upon a Time, I think she was the wolf, which I thought was also kind of clever too. She was a fairy tale version of a werewolf. There's also the horror movie called Little Red Riding Hood that involves one of the actresses from Mean Girls. I forget her name, but it's the
Amanda
dumb
Seyfried.
Yes, and that's also a great adaptation because she falls in love with the wolf and becomes a part of the pack by becoming a werewolf.
Well, she was originally because she had the bloodline from her dad.
Right. And
so
her dad was the werewolf, I think.
Yeah. And so was her grandmother knew about the genes and everything. And and with Irons, I think it was Jeremy Irons, but not like the older one, the younger one. I think there's two actors named Jeremy Irons, but the younger one was like, he wasn't Peter, but he was the half brother of her half sister.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that part got really confusing.
Yeah.
Especially when I'm watching it as like a preteen. But like, because the werewolf or wolf in general is supposed to represent the bad nature of men of, oh, well, they can't, they're consumed by lust. So it's up to the female not to, and it's like, nah, I just
I
want to
didn't
go
really
off into the woods and not have to deal with society's expectations.
I know I didn't really take the wolf as like a depiction of men, more as like a depiction of how twisted and terrible society can be and why we should always be aware of the worst while always thinking of the best.
It honestly depends on the version. Because if you watch the film stage version, if that makes sense, so it's the stage version that got filmed of Into the Woods, you can see the wolf's genitalia as part of his costume because it's supposed to
Really?
be that, yeah. But in the new one, it's not. So it really depends on the version and what the person writing it and adapting it is trying to say. Because if they are trying to talk about, female innocence and against a terrible society, then okay, yeah, you're just gonna have it as the wolf. He's the bad guy. He's tricking this girl into whatever. But on most versions of Red Riding Hood, the wolf is very sexualized. And it's
Okay.
meant to be about taking a female's innocence before marriage, essentially.
Okay,
Um,
I didn't know that.
but I like it's more for me that story is more, especially because a lot of times when it is the female going with the wolf, there might be like a little bit of coercion, but for the most part, it's her just going, yeah, screw society. Society sucks. I don't feel like dealing with the expectations of being a female. So let's just go live in the woods with the wolves. And so, like, as a female who was very tomboyish as a kid, growing up, still being told, you need to be more feminine. First off, no. But yeah, so the Red Riding Hood, but also I feel like I like Red Riding Hood a little bit more because there's a little bit more action.
Yeah.
Like the other ones, it's like, oh, okay, so there's no like okay, Hansel and Gretel, uh, they're kids who outwit the witch and are able to push her into the oven. Perfect. Um, and then they come home and their stepmother is gone, and you're like, is it the same person? I asked my kids that because we read Hansel and Gretel a different day, and they were like, "Did you notice that the mom is gone?" And I was like, "Did you notice that she might also be the witch?" And they were like, "What?"
Sorry,
But
background noise of trains going through and just
oh,
really making a lot of noise. It's just great.
we're used to that.
Yeah.
Brendan and I had that a lot. So, but there's also the versions in the books by Alex Flynn. So you got Beastly. I'm not remembering any of the other books, but there's a whole bunch of them because they all spin off of each other and connect. You've got the show Grimm, which I loved that show because it connected different cultures of their fairy tales and lore together as well. So like there is one that the episode is about Native American and Ojibwe culture and the lore on a specific creature. And I was like, yes, we're getting that and we're not being stupid about it. Like we're actually being respectful. Like because they actually had Native American actors coming in and explaining the story. Like their character was explaining it, not the white person explaining it. And honestly, I loved that show. I need to rewatch it because I don't think I ever technically finished it. But then there's also a new series that's called The Lunar Chronicles. So it's Cinder, Scarlet, and Cress with I think 2 short story spin-offs. But it also that makes it also more science fiction because like Cinderella is part robot.
Okay.
But they're also because like she had to get like limbs replaced and stuff, so she's got like the computer, whatever. But also moon people, like they live on the moon and like are trying to take over humanity, and oh, it's so good. Um, but yeah, we have all these adaptations, and it kind of amazes me that like we haven't run out of ways to adapt fairy tales from Hans Christian Andersen and Grimm's brothers. Like, if you really go through and look, I mean, if you look up Cinderella, you're gonna find at least like 1,000 different versions. Um, because I found, I think I was gonna do 4 different short stories of the Cinderella story, and one was like South African, one was from Appalachia, another one was like South Carolina from like Black communities, Creole, that's what I was trying to think of. Um, I don't remember what the other one was. Oh, Zimbabwe.
Mm.
But like they had a whole like it was a whole website that was like, all right, what country do you want? Because there are like 100 different stories in this country. There's 5 stories in this country. Um, and that's really cool that we can do that where we can connect across cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. Going back to your Once Upon a Time, I I got mad with how much they connected different characters together in a way.
Yeah, with Rumpelstiltskin being the one manipulating everybody, I can see how that can annoy some people.
Well, he was also Peter Pan's son, which made
Yeah.
Peter Pan Henry's great grandfather. Um, but then like because the evil queen adopted Henry, therefore she was Henry's mother along with Emma. Um, and then you also and it was just like, wait, can we just like can we create an actual tree that does not cross paths?
Uh,
Um,
well, no, I guess you can't now.
I think I honestly wanted more of uh the Mad Hatter, Jefferson, not just
Yeah.
because it was played by Sebastian Stan, but like the role of Jefferson himself. Like he was the only one besides Regina and Rumpelstiltskin and technically Henry that
Mm-hmm.
like knew. And it was like, do you realize he could screw your stuff up? Like, why didn't they do that?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, probably to lengthen the TV show for more
Yeah.
seasons. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, do you have any other commentary on fairy tales or
Uh,
Disenchanted?
I will say this, Doctor Who, I think, is also a modern fairy tale, especially for the 11th Doctor.
To be
If you,
honest, I have not watched Doctor Who. The one time I tried watching an episode, I got really confused.
that's okay. Well, more specifically for the 11th Doctor, because in the very first episode, it starts out with a girl seeing the Doctor crashed in her backyard, and she thinks that he's his imaginary friend. And the whole time that she grows up, she's been telling people that she saw this man in her backyard that one night, and he was real. And to her, she called him her Raggedy Man. And for British terms, that means imaginary friend or crazy person. And then the Doctor shows up later in the episode to introduce himself as like this being who can take her along this magical journey to see all these different kinds of creatures. And there are fairies and monsters and werewolves introduced in Doctor Who, and there are a lot of fairy tale tropes used in Doctor Who episodes. And I think for anybody who wants to who likes fairy tales but also wants to get into like sci-fi, I think Doctor Who's just like a great show, because there's also this one episode in Doctor Who, I forget the name of it, but it's towards the 11th end series, and I think it's called Listen. and it's about the doctor exploring this haunted house, and it's about two alien creatures communicating with each other, one on Earth and the other on another plane of existence, using writing on the wall and trying to communicate with each other. And the doctor thinks that it's aliens trying to take over the Earth, when really it's a love story between the two aliens and them trying to get back home to each other. It's a really sweet episode, and like the alien, when you actually see it, it's really cool. It's like this tree twisted looking Muppet almost, and it's completely practical, and it's a great heartwarming episode just about two people trying to get back to each other like in a fairy tale. Yeah.
I was also reminded of there are a few supernatural episodes that deal with fairy tales.
Mhm.
But also I'd like to point out that in Frozen 2, I think it's number 2,
Mhm.
Anna and Elsa's mom, when their dad was like, "Oh, what are you reading?" And she was like, "Oh, this new like Swedish author or whatever it was." That was Hans Christian Andersen that she
Yeah,
was reading.
didn't he write The Snow Queen, which the
I
story is
think
actually
so.
based off of? Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
thought.
And I was
Yeah.
like, you did your research.
Yeah.
Um
Even though the story is completely different than what Frozen turned out to be.
yeah, but I mean it's
Doesn't
an
also
adaptation.
doesn't Elsa like kill her sister in the original Snow Queen story?
I don't remember because I
I know
get
that people
mixed up
said
like the Snow Queen versus like Snow White.
right. Well, obviously not Snow White, because Snow White
Yeah.
wasn't or anything, but I know that people said like Snow Queen and Frozen, don't show your kids the Snow Queen because one is really different than Frozen, and two, it's really dark. I think because the Snow Queen tries to cure herself of her powers and she accidentally kills her sister, which kind of actually happened in the story now that I think about it, but just like in a less dark way. That was more on accident, but
Well,
in the story,
I
I think
think
it's
that's how the Huntsman with Chris Hemsworth
Mhm.
and Charlize Theron and oh my gosh, John Krasinski's wife.
Oh, Emily Blunt.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, Emily Blunt. That I think that's how that one went. I haven't seen that one yet. Um, but I saw the first one, which was Snow White and the Huntsman with Bella from Twilight, Kristen Stewart.
Mhm.
Um, but those were also really good. But
Yeah.
I think that's how it goes for the Huntsman from what I remember of seeing, but I could be
Mhm.
wrong.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind.
But yeah.
Mhm.
So as always on Raving Geeks, we like to end our episodes with some geek recommendations, and this can be books, movies, TV shows, music, TikTok, TikTokers, TikTok videos, whatever we find interesting and geeky and want y'all to be a part of. So, Carter, what recommendations do you have for us this week?
I have two recommendations. One, my background behind me is Guardians of the Galaxy, the holiday special that recently came out on Disney Plus. It's very heartwarming, and it makes you think about the Guardians in a different light. There is one Guardian who has this big twist to reveal to Star-Lord, and you see it coming, but at the same time you don't. And when it was said, I'm like, it still got me like surprised, like, oh, that did happen. And then I thought back all the way to Guardians 2, and I'm like, oh yeah, that did happen. I don't know why that wasn't more of a revelation for me, but the way they treat it as a revelation during the story is really clever. And I was surprised with James Gunn writing for that story. And the other recommendation I'd like to give is for everybody to go see Violent Night, starring David Harbour. It's about Santa Claus saving a little girl and her family from a bunch of mercenaries. And it's not directed, but it's written by the same people who did John Wick. So, and it comes out at the time of this recording this Friday.
So tomorrow.
Mhm.
All right. Well, my recommendations are if you haven't seen the original Enchanted with Amy Adams and Patrick Dempsey and Adina Menzel and James Marsden, I highly recommend you see that one, and then you go watch Disenchanted. Also so you can join in on our conversation about Disenchanted. But I am also going to recommend all of the different fairy tale versions that we talked about today. And then my final one is Vampire Academy on Peacock. It is a book series. I know I'm doing it out of order. I know I'm supposed to read the books first and then watch the TV series, but people got me hooked on Dimitri on TikTok, and I'm really upset, so I had to go watch it. And then I fell in love with the actor because, so random fact, Kieran Moore, he was a boxer first, so like the fight scenes, I am sure he had part in choreographing the fight scenes, especially the ones that he's in. But he also does poetry. So like if you follow his TikTok, he's trying to think of the word. Speaks his own poetry, like he shares it. Even the ones that he's not like fully confident or happy with. And so I think that's really cool. And yeah, so Vampire Academy, read the books, watch the TV series if you have Peacock. And also follow Kieran Moore on TikTok because his poetry is awesome. And I'm gonna put in a shameless plug, because I did get 2 poems published. I was told of this past week, for the Central Review magazine. Um, and we are having a reading on December 7th at 7 p.m. in Park Auditorium in the library. And so you get to hear one of my poems. I'll read it out loud. I'm not saying which one because I still haven't fully decided. But yeah, so those are my recommendations. So as always, you guys can find us on Twitter and Facebook at Raving Geeks, and you can reach out to us on TikTok at Raving Geeks as well. You can comment on our videos. You can send us messages, send us ideas of what to post. I have some ideas. I'm finalizing them, so I should be posting new videos soon. Just gotta like edit them together. But yeah, so as always, I have been Hope Goodearl along with my co-host.
I'm Carter Salley.
We hope that you all have a great weeky and stay geeky, everyone.
See you guys later.